Our guest today on the Ryerson Negotiation Project is Dr. Ivan Joseph, Director of Athletics at Ryerson University. Welcome to our program.
Thanks for having me, David. Happy to be here.
Our guest has a Bachelor of Science from Graceland University in the United States, a Master's of Higher Education Administration from Drake University, and he also has a PhD in Sports Psychology from Capella University in the United States. Prior to coming to Ryerson University, our guest served as Director of Soccer Operations at Graceland University, and for a period of 6 years, he served as Assistant Professor, School of Human Movement at Graceland University. He's achieved numerous honors and awards, including the President's Blue and Gold Award of Excellence at Ryerson University, Excellence in Sports Award, the African Canadian Achievement Awards, Coach of the Year, Ontario University Athletics, Hall of Fame inductee, King City Secondary School, National Coach of the Year, National Association of Intercollegiate Athletes in the United States, and a Conference Coach of the Year, Heart of America, 1997, 2005, and again in 2007. Our guest has had a remarkable career, and the people that know him best, his students, his players, and his colleagues, all attest to the fact that this man is an inspirational leader. And we're delighted to have Dr. Ivan Joseph join us for our program here today. Doctor, if I may?
Call me Ivan, please.
Okay, I'll call you Ivan. Share with us the kinds of internal stakeholders a director of athletics at such a prestigious school as Ryerson, which seems to be on the move upward in intercollegiate sports. Who are your internal stakeholders?
Happy to do so, David. Before I do, thank you for the very kind and flattering introduction. It's always nice to be introduced with a few lies in there, so much appreciated and obliged. I think one of the things you have to recognize as a director of athletics, you have many internal stakeholders, and they're all equally important. The first one that jumps to mind for everybody is, of course, your students. They're the people that are paying the fees and in turn actually paying your wage and giving you the dollars and the budget to do the things that will help ultimately put your mark on the campus. Here at Ryerson, at the time I started, it was 28,000 internal stakeholders. We're now at the point of we have 40,000 internal stakeholders. And you know, that subset needs to be divided into two groups. There's the general student body population, which has different needs than our varsity student athletes, which have different needs. And you have to make sure as a director of athletics, you don't just focus on the varsity end of your program, that you're focusing on the general student body population and recognizing they are very complete different populations, even though they're both, say, students. The next group that you have to be well aware of is the faculty and staff that make up your university. Any university is made up of faculties and different, I'll say it nicely, political agendas. And you have to be able to meet the needs of the faculty and staff because ultimately they're the gatekeepers of many of the processes and policies you want to undertake. And of course, another internal stakeholder group that people forget is the senior level administration of the university. We have to do a very deliberate and intentional job in making sure that they are on board with our mission and that we are also supporting their mission. Right? External now?
No, but just stay on the internal stakeholders.
Yeah.
What are the challenges from the student body versus the varsity athletes? I mean, I think I have an idea in terms of what it might be, but perhaps you could share it with us in terms of their needs and their aspirations.
Yeah, you have to recognize that in Canada, the director of athletics position is different than in the States. In Canada, athletics and recreation really serves a role of student engagement. And so I'll tell you it from this perspective, is that we know, all the researcher says that the students who are more engaged, meaning that they're tied into some sort of group, mentor, role model, some sort of community, they're more likely to persist and do well academically. And so as an athletic director, I try to provide opportunities for students to be engaged on our campus, whether that's intramurals, recreational opportunities to pursue, groups to belong to just casually run into people, that's my job. So whether it's creating open recreation gym, show up and play basketball, and then friendships belong.
Don't
and
have to
begin.
be on a team, you can just
Yep.
go on the course.
Show up and belong, and all of a sudden relationships form, study groups form from that. Or you know what, we're in the residence hall and we're gonna come as a group, and now we're creating more meaningful ways to really tie and buy together. Or we're gonna say, you know what, I've got a unique group and I wanna start my own fast pitch group. Women's team started fast pitch.
Does the data justify that? You made the statement that students that are more engaged in a program or athletic activity or attending various events, the more engaged they are, the more they will do academically?
100%. I can't quote the studies because I don't have them at the tip of my tongue, but that is one of the things. My graduate research was on minority students' persistence on predominantly white campuses. And one of the things that was a key was the ability for students to hook on to a coach, an intramural leader, a residence hall person, an instructional person. Those are the key things in finding success at any university.
Very good. Share with us the external stakeholders that a director of athletics would have to be concerned about.
I think the key one is your biggest external stakeholders are the ones who are your former internal stakeholders, and they just move into a different role, which is alumni. Alumni they're a fickle group, right? Because they want to be loved and they want to be appreciated, but they don't want to be loved and appreciated too much. And you always have to find that balance.
It's a balance act,
right? It is a tricky one, and you know, I've made some positive steps, and I've made some missteps with my alumni engagement along the way, as I'm sure you'll ask later on, but that's a story for another day. We have sponsors and what we'll call people that are friends of the university. We have many programs that we run across the campus in an athletic pursuit, and many of those. Some great sponsors help support those programs in order for us to deliver our services to the community. One of the things Ryerson prides itself is being a city builder, and our role as an athletic department is to engage the community in that, and our sponsors are the ones that help us provide those opportunities at whether cost reduced or for free for our community. I've just mentioned the third one, which is our community. Ryerson takes great pride in not being what we'll call a typical town and gown, two distinct parts of a city. They're enmeshed into the city, and I think we add value to our community, and we always have to think about how do we enrich the community that we're a part of. When we built this center, we weren't building an athletic center or a gymnasium that was just to serve our needs as a university. We were trying to say, how do we bring the community into our building and into our campus.
Do you have any examples that you could share with us in terms of the community? Because that's a sort of a big word, the community. But
yeah.
Give us an example.
A great example is one of the things we do is a Rising Rams program and our Rising Rams mentorship program. Every student athlete that is an athlete at Ryerson has to do 10 hours of community service. And some of our athletes will go out into the community, into the schools, and they'll deliver workshops such as healthy mind, healthy body, fitness, learn to read. What we started to do now is bring those students into our campus. So we have teamed up with Jumpstart and the NHLPA and Loblaws to deliver a very encompassing 10-week program where kids will come learn how to skate. They'll get a meal. They'll learn time management. They'll learn goal setting. And we're bringing those students in after school.
What age would they be?
They're right now elementary age, so
I wouldn't qualify.
You know, David, it's hard to say, but you know, one of the things that makes that program so rich, it's not just the lives of the students that are coming in that we're changing. It's really impacting our student athletes' lives because they see now how they can add value to their community.
Now, when you say student athletes, you mean varsity athletes?
Varsity athletes.
So they engage in this program with the community.
Absolutely.
To make the contribution.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Share with us in terms of where do you get your mandate?
Well, I think we always have to fulfill the university's mission, right? And it starts there, all right? And when we think about the university's mission, which is to be educators first and foremost, and I'm paraphrasing that, then we figure out is how do we fit into that university's mission? And we look at the academic plan, which says, how do we become city builders? How do we make sure we're inclusive? How do we speak about diversity? How do we make sure we always talk about integrity? And our president, Dr. Lachemay, has done a great job in articulating a clear vision for us and identifying priorities. And we now as a department says, okay, when we've seen this vision, and we've seen these number of priorities, how do we fit into there, and how can we best serve the university's mission of meeting societal need as a scholar practitioner way.
So the primary purpose is educational.
100%.
Secondary would be athletic activities, whether varsity or non-varsity.
Yeah, I would say it differently. Our primary purpose is educational. And how do we use sport and recreation to support the educational model, right? That's how I would say it. And so we use sport as a medal of retention through the intramural piece to make sure that students persist to fill the educational mission. We use athletics from a competition point of view to also teach a lot of life skills, a lot of life learning. If you were to use a Venn diagram, all right, I would say in this circle right here, this is the academic circle. And if you're a biologist, you learn about the formula of glucose, C6H12O6. Or if you're an economist, I'm sure there's some fancy formula that would go with whatever it might be. And that's truly great learning. In that circle, excellent. But you don't make a well-rounded circle. Over here on the other person is another person that does clubs, that belongs to Enactus, that belongs to the clubs for radio and television, that does all those other things. And those students are equally learning and having great valued experience. If I find a way to combine those two circles, the best learning happens in the middle. And that's the role of athletics. It's part of the co-curricular academic experience of any student that's here at Ryerson.
So would I be right in assuming, and it's not good to make assumptions because you can clarify it for me, but as the director of athletics at Ryerson University, you're saying in essence that your program and your activities are aligned with the academic plan. Am I right on that?
Absolutely. You know, when you look at our mission statement says this: Ryerson Athletics enriches the academic experience. That's key for me. And the reason it says that is quite simple. We're a part of the academic experience, and we do the most important thing, which is we complement it.
Very good, very good. Tell me about your preparation, whether it's dealing with an internal stakeholder, whether it's dealing with an external stakeholder. Perhaps you could give examples for both.
100%. I think one of the first things is when I first came here, here's how I learned to deal with the internal stakeholder. I came from the NCAA model. And so my knowledge of the Canadian system of athletics was limited at best. The first thing I did was I met with 14 of the 17 athletic directors in Canada. My job was to gain knowledge. The next thing I did was I met with probably 2,500 different students. Pizza groups, focus groups, one-on-ones, different town halls, just gathering information. What do they like? What don't they like? How are we meeting their needs? How are we not meeting their needs? How can we move their student experience forward? And then I just sat there and I listened and I listened and I listened some more. Then I met with our staff and our faculty, again, gathering more information. And when I had that information, I was tempted to want to move, but I did nothing.
Before you further that sentence, what kind of depth would you go into with students and with professors in terms of the athletic program as you were trying to understand it from a Canadian perspective?
Well, it was, I'll give you some, and this is going back 8 years ago, so I'll have to go really back into the cobwebs of the archives there. But for me, it was a series of questions I was asking students. And so the questions were this simple, and then was this much depth. You know, do you participate in our athletics program, right?
And what was the answer?
Right? Many of them no. The really one that caught me by surprise is, are you proud of the Ryerson University athletic program? No. Do you know what our Ryerson nickname is? No. Right? Do you like the gear that we wear? No, I'm embarrassed to wear it. And then I would probe, because then I want to know why. Why are you embarrassed to wear it? Because our teams are always losing. When I go to play, I don't want people to know that I'm a Ryerson Ram, even though I play on the team.
They were that clear, that specific.
That is a 100% verbatim example, right? I don't like that our building is underground. Nobody knows that we exist. We're an afterthought to the university.
Did you sense any of this prior to the engagement of the students or the faculty about the athletic program?
100%. One of the things that before I came here, I read in the Globe and Mail, and it was a little blurb, probably a 6-inch article, had a picture of Kim St. Pierre. And underneath it said, Kim St. Pierre is the first woman to win a university hockey game against a men's team, right? And actually it said 2-time Olympic gold medalist, Kim St. Pierre, right? And then it said ... until you, which is impressive, until you remember ... it was Ryerson. And to me, that always said to me as an athletic director, and I shared this message with my president, that the public's perception of your athletic department influences their perception of your academic reputation. And that was key for me, right? This wasn't a standalone thing. Everybody knew on the front page of the Globe and Mail, on the sports section, how bad Ryerson athletics was, right? And they were making inferences that that might pass on to the academic reputation of the university.
Was that shared? Was that agreed to by faculty and the administration, that there was a correlation
It was
in terms of being poorly perceived? You could be poorly perceived academically as well.
Absolutely. It was agreed to by the president and the provost. Both of them were the ones I was sharing that message with, and that's why they started to move in raising the profile and helping to support me and try some of the initiatives we were doing.
So that's a pretty intensive exercise in trying to ascertain the interest and the concerns of your internal stakeholders. What were your external stakeholders telling you?
Pretty much the exact same thing.
Probably in more colorful language.
Yes, but it was harder to get to them. And the reason is they were disengaged. They weren't following Ryerson Ram. And so to get to them, you only had a handful. So you couldn't have as rich and as deep a conversation, because there weren't any to be had that were still connected to the university. And the ones that were older, that were connected to the university, felt a sense of abandonment and, what the heck are you coming for me now? You only want my money. You don't really care about what I have to say. I'm only successful because of what I've done, not because of what the university. And we had to work long and hard on trying to bring that relationship and steward that relationship to a point where they saw us as more than just people coming after them with our handout.
Very good. Share with us again in terms of your approach as it relates to communications. What's Dr. Joseph's communication style? Are you a phone guy? Are you a meeting guy? Are you email, text, combination? What's the style that you bring to your deliberations?
I will say this, that the style has evolved as I've evolved as a leader. And I think that's an important piece to recognize and understand. My style used to always be what I'll call the hallway, flyby. Hey, poke my head in. Or if I saw you in the hallway, hey, don't forget this, this, and this, right? And I had all those conversations. But a lot of things got misinterpreted when you do that hallway stop and fly by, always face to face. Because sometimes I think out loud, and when I'm thinking out loud, people interpret that as action. Oh, well, I'm not sure what we should do. When I say I'm not sure, that doesn't mean don't do it. That means hold, I'm still thinking. And a lot of times when I poke my head in, people think let's go, let's move, or we're not clear on our communication. As I've moved on now in my communication, it's still a level of pop my head in. It's still a level of come on into my office, let's sit and chat. But what I've learned is let's get everybody in the room. I used to have conversations with this person, then this person, and this person that were all on the same initiative, and I couldn't be sure that all three were hearing the same thing. Now it's, hey, all three of us, we've got a decision to make. Let's get everybody in the room. Let's make sure we all hear the same message and we all go out with the same outcome and process.
That's a good learning insight, because when you're dealing with one-on-one, there may be particular interest of that individual, which may not be the interest of the collective group. But when you have everybody in a room together, participating in those discussions, it helps to collaborate more, to be more cohesive, what have you.
A big part of the communication that's just starting to shift is this whole idea for me to understand the role of personal branding, the role of social media, the role of all this digital communication that's happening. And I'm not a big fan of it, even though I've got a social media coach helping me to raise the profile. And I was like, well, why is this happening? And they showed me how other deans and presidents and other serious CEOs and leaders were using this as a method of communication. Not so much about I'll say moving their organization forward, but as establishing ways to increase, I'll say, the profile of the university, the department, and validate some of the things that they're doing as part of the marketing process, which is really what I saw it as. And I'm like, I'm not interested in marketing myself. I have no interest in that. And what really switched my head is, If you market yourself, you raise the profile of the organization you're leading, which allows you then to have more things happen that are in the best interest of the Department of Athletics. And that's when I was able to get on board with that.
What about the students in terms of profiling them?
I think that's a big part of what we're doing. And so part of, today if you've noticed on my Twitter, I wrote, great read on one of our best Rams. And it was a student, Aaron Armstrong, who was a hockey player that came from a little town of 1,000 folks. That's one of now our leading OUA folks. That's part of my job so what I'm doing there is speaking about self-confidence and grit and resilience, which is one of my key things I speak about, but I'm using a student athlete to do that. And in doing that, I'm raising the brand of the Ryerson Rams.
What do you do in terms of, from a communications point of view, to profile one of your internal stakeholders, which is your coaches?
That's a big piece, and I think I need to be a little bit more deliberate and intentional on that. We were just having this conversation the other day. In our stable of coaches, we have 2 national team coaches and an Olympic gold medalist. And I'm not sure that I'm doing enough as director of athletics in my own internal communication and external communication, especially on my digital platform, to profile that a lot, right? To the point where we just came back and said, hey, I think we've missed an opportunity because we were doing our top 10 list of all the great things, and we didn't celebrate their FIBA America's silver medalist. I'm like, why are we missing that? And we didn't see the connection between putting that on our site and promoting what they're doing as a part of raising our brand as well. We saw that as their own external side thing instead of recognizing that those are closely linked. And when we raised the coach's profile, again, no different than my own, the team and the university's profile also raises.
There's a real correlation, is there not?
Absolutely.
Sticking with the communications envelope, social media, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. Years ago, when you're dealing with, quote, the media, there was the traditional forms of media.
Yeah.
But now all of this social media can have an impact on the old media. They'll pick up a story in terms of what's being tweeted by the athletic director and a particular coach. What sort of thought do you give to that in terms of the impact on the Department of Athletics and on the students and on the coaches?
Oh, we've been so intentional in creating new models of training for communication and making folks understand the impact of instant communication.
Can you give us some examples?
100%. One of the things, and this is a misstep I made, so I'll give you an error in terms of me trying to do good. We had all our teams together, and we showed them how social media can work in the negative way, right? And so that they understood the power of social media. I said, I am now your boss, and you've just applied for a job. And so I'm going to show you what I just went by Googling your name. And I Googled their names, and I put up on the screen all these different shots of all our students. And these are shots of them grabbing and vomiting and 16 bears in hands and all of these things. And the room went silent. Like, oh my God. It did what it was supposed to do, which was scare the crap out of them and to recognize the power of social media. But it didn't do what I wanted it to do, or it did something I didn't intend, which was I shamed some of them, right? And the lesson was a little bit too strong. So I had to come back and it's like, whoa, that wasn't what I meant to do, was to show them at their worst. I changed it in the presentation instead, and I'm going off topic, but I changed it to show them more in humorous and funny, embarrassing moments instead of like, oh my God, this could cause me a job moment. But they didn't understand that that stuff is out there forever. And no different than me as an athletic director going and looking them up, somebody's gonna go do that for them. They didn't get the responsibility they have in protecting their image, their brand, and their identity.
Tell us, Ivan, where do you stand on the issue of relationships?
Well, be more specific.
Well, you're dealing with external stakeholders. You're dealing with sponsors. You're dealing with the alumni. What sort of effort do you put in to developing those relationships?
I think it's
if you do anything.
Yeah, I think it's, I will say this, no great change or initiative happens without some form of connection and relationship with the stakeholder. I would easily say that from an athletic director's point of view, I am probably from the status and credibility and experience, one of not the most significantly oiled machine. But what I have been able to do is nurture meaningful relationships being intentional in understanding how the relationships need to work, who can remove roadblocks, who is a roadblock, understanding how those relationships are, and being there in order to nurture them, in order to help move my agenda forward. So a perfect example, if I know somebody's gonna have an issue with a point, I'm not gonna surprise them and let them hear that meeting the first time. I want them to know what's happening. I want to hear what their feedback is. I want to address that so that when they come and then they hear it in front of everybody, I've met their needs. I think one of the biggest things that we don't understand is that conflict is a part of any relationship, and we can't hide from it. We have to understand that we can't just go to somebody and have that conflict right away, is that we have to have had some sort of meaningful, positive interaction in order for us to have productive conflict. And that's the part that we forget about when we think about relationships.
So just elaborate on productive conflict.
Productive conflict, and I'll say there's unproductive conflict and there's productive conflict. And I use it this way. There are people there that are always there to give you negative feedback that will tear you down. That they don't have any interest in seeing you be successful. This is never gonna work. This is not gonna happen. Those people don't provide you, but here's why it's not gonna work. Here's what you need to do to change it. That's what I call productive conflict. There's naysayers who are just there, like, that's not gonna work. I've already tried that. No, not interested.
So what do you do with a naysayer that says, well, I don't know what to do, but I'll tell you, it's not gonna change?
Well, do you want the politically correct answer, that's the theoretical framework, or do you want the real answer?
I want the real answer.
For me, the real answer is you move forward and past them. You know, sometimes in an organization, you can't get rid of them because they're locked and tied in and there's lots of rules. You performance manage them. But at the end of the day, what you do is you find the people who are productive, who are gonna give you the feedback you need. Some people are just negative and sour. That's their disposition. As a psychologist, I believe that personality is stable and enduring. So I'm never gonna change a sour Sally into a positive Polly, right? So I'm not going there for my feedback. And it doesn't mean that they're not good in their job just because they're negative, but they're not good for me, and I'm not gonna surround myself with negativity. I'll go to and I'll seek out where the positive feedback is.
That's an interesting approach in terms of conflict. Do you run the risk of being too quick in analyzing that individual who's just a naysayer without trying to get that naysayer on side and to move them forward?
Yeah, I think what I'm talking about is when you've moved from there. There's always going to be people, and this is when you've developed a pattern, right? You're not going to get turned away from the first person, right? And I think that you bring a key point is this is a pattern. You've gone to that person 3, 4, 5, whatever the number is. This isn't a once or a twice or 3 times. But after they've established where they are from that point of view, you get it. You might still have to ask the naysayer, because if you don't, they're gonna feel like they're not consulted, right? You still might need to ask them their opinion and get the response, which is like, I don't think that's gonna work, but at least you can check your box, consulted, move forward.
Tell me about multi-party stakeholders. You are engaged with the community, sponsors, alumni on a particular project, whether it's a soccer field, whether it's a new soccer field, the use of an existing soccer field. What sort of preparation would you do for the multi-party stakeholders that might be a little bit different from, say, the individual stakeholder that you have to deal with?
Right. Well, I'll say the multi-stakeholder starts all with the same piece, which is understand their needs, right? It's no different than the individual. My job is to always understand people's needs. When we're coming to a project, and it's no different than this vase with multi-petals, is what are individual people's needs? What are the individual stakeholders' needs? And then I look for where the overlap is. Because if I can figure out how we can meet both our needs, that's the starting point.
But I want you to share with the viewer here. That's a wonderful statement. I want to understand the needs. But how do you do that?
Right.
How do you understand the needs of Group A versus Group B? What are some of the practical things and insights that you've been able to accumulate over these years to focus on that?
Let me give you a specific example with Maple Leaf Gardens, right? Or now the current Mattamy Athletic Center. You had sponsorship and donor, right? You had individual corporation. You had our student stakeholders. You had our president. You had the director of athletics. You had Maple Leaf alumni. All of those were individual pieces of the pie, right? And my job, and again, maybe it's too simple, David, But my job was to sit down with those people. So I remember sitting down with what we'll call, it was John Sewell. John Sewell, and he was one of the groups that we had to make sure that we weren't taking this beautiful building off campus, offline for the community. And he had a bunch of group of folks, and he wanted to make sure that this building was still going to meet the needs, that kids were going to get to skate in this building, that we're a community that was going to get to skate in this building. And there was a group of them that came in. And I remember, I will say it was a lively conversation at the beginning, because they were convinced that Ryerson was taking this building and just going to serve students, and nobody else would have access to this building.
So the community would be cut off.
Yeah, and he was, you know, and he was content, and I wouldn't say there was contentious, but he was nervous and he was worried. And our job, I remember sitting on the 14th floor and saying, tell us what your programming is going to be like. Tell us what you need. Tell us what you're talking about. I'm like, I started listening. I'm like, John, this sounds very familiar. Let me share with you and what my person over here is building. And she started talking about the Ryerson Rams program. And at the end of the meeting, it was like, oh, this is awesome. How can we help you fundraise for this? This meets exactly, we don't need, because it started with, we're going to have a committee that's going to oversee this, and we're going to look after this, and we're going to make sure you're doing this, this, and this. And it came out with, we don't need a committee. We don't need to oversee anything. In fact, how can we help you deliver this program? It really was that simple to get that person. Now, once we've met their needs, now I've got to get all the other multi-stakeholder groups then together, right? Because we had that conversation, we had to hear it, we had our piece, they had to sign off. Okay, now how do we get them all together?
So what sort of preparatory work do you do before meeting with the John Sewells in terms of their needs and aspirations?
Oh, first off,
I want you to tell our audience that, because this is a very important piece, because
Yeah.
a lot of people assume that, well, you know, I'll just sit down and have a conversation, thank you very much, and I'll learn from this particular person, and that's it.
No.
But it's much more, isn't it?
Oh my goodness. There was work behind the scenes for me to understand who he was and what his history was and who he was tied to. I had to know who the key people were on their committee, and I needed to know that quickly, because that told me what agendas and what issues and what insights they were. I didn't know, like, he was a former mayor and he was this and he was that, and it was like, oh, okay, because you couldn't go in there like a gunslinger just reacting. I knew before that we went to that meeting exactly what he wanted. There was a lot of backstory and back history about what he was trying to do and what his agenda was in terms of meeting the public's needs, which were great stories, and it wasn't some like seedy agenda, but I knew it before. And so when I knew that, before I met him, I was able to make sure that our program, I was like, let's make sure we have this in there, let's make sure we have this in there, let's make sure we have this in there when we're talking to him at the first time, right? Don't underestimate the value of doing your homework beforehand. You should never go into a meeting cold and blind and not knowing anything or the historical pieces of information that will serve you the best.
So the age-old proposition of prepare, 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 prepare is still a viable option for anybody that's in a senior leadership role, such as yourself.
Probably the most important thing I did was gather information, and not just gather it from a process of, okay, let me know about it. Gather it with the process of, how can I, now that I understand him, how can I meet his needs, which still allows me to serve my own needs of my stakeholders. And that's the important piece, because you don't want to blow smoke. You don't want to make false promises. Here's the key things that I can deliver that also meet our objectives.
Now, as an advocate for